usually, at least mainstream people, think of when they think of a quote-unquote Godzilla movie. Godzilla shows up for approximately, off the top of my head, I think like 5 or 6 scenes. Most of those scenes, I think like half of those scenes are less than a minute. Some of them a few seconds. Notably the one where he kind of just photobombs that party boat, I guess. So again, the original Godzilla focuses much more on the disaster, and it's understandable. It's in a way an allegory for the original bombings and just the experience of homeland domestic Japan during the course of World War II, which included submarines sinking their shipping ships, so causing mass famines on the island, the fire bombings, just doing utter devastation, destruction, and of course, being the only country on Earth to have a nuclear bomb wielded against them as a weapon, not once, but twice. And on top of all that, you also have the fact that the United States occupied them for a fair number of years. And while more than a little good came of that, obviously a lot of frustration and anxiety also came from that. So you have a lot of those themes throughout this film. And so, because of this, you see 2 major themes you can pull from the original Godzilla that come out through this. And one is the original Godzilla, and to, I would say, slightly less percent, but still there, much of the focus is not on the destruction, which more modern, later Godzilla films will focus on. Instead, you get a much stronger focus on the consequences of this destruction. It's, the presence of Godzilla, large chunks of the movie are about not just the government's response, but evacuations. There is a large scene in the original Godzilla that's them just at a hospital, invoking imagery of people trying to recover from being hit with a bomb. So you have people dying from radiation poisoning, people in burn wards after Godzilla unleashed a truly horrific fire breath attack in the middle of Tokyo. And so you have all of these themes that come together to be, this is a film about reacting to this destruction, not just witnessing this cool disaster porn. On top of that, a common criticism I've heard of Legendary Godzilla more, but I've actually heard it of Shin Godzilla as well, is that there's not enough Godzilla. And again, if you go back to the original Godzilla, there's not that much Godzilla in it. And the reason, again, even though he's much more a focal point in that and Shin than he is in Legendary, and I will grant that common criticism, the focus is again on humans and the human reaction to these monsters. In the case of Godzilla, Legendary Godzilla, then what's it like when you are between 2 monsters about to throw down? It's a much more horrific and horrifying image than, the usual awesomeness of watching Godzilla body slam a giant mosquito. Which is awesome, don't get me wrong. I live for that stuff, but, sometimes it's interesting to see a different interpretation of things. So again, we see that you have 2 films where the focal point, the protagonist, isn't really Godzilla. And so he is often not the center of the frame, and when he is, it is because he is the center of focus of a character who is a protagonist. Another thing of note is that both films never show things, for the most part, it might be an exception, it's been a while since I've watched some of them, where things happen because there's someone there to witness them. Later Godzilla films, there are scenes of Godzilla swimming underwater to remind you that, don't worry, this is a Godzilla film, Godzilla's still in it. He didn't mysteriously leave while we had that long dialogue sequence about aliens hacking a newspaper to the skyscraper. These films, there's no scenes like that, ever. Because the only time you see them is when there's someone there to be seen. Whether it's through a newscast of a really awesome looking kaiju fight in Legendary, or it's through social media and Shin Godzilla. There is someone there to record and witness what is occurring. Which brings us to the final similarity I want to bring attention to, I think is genuinely interesting. Now, both of these films are kind of
not sequels in the sense narratively, but in the sense of there are films that precede them. Now we have to confront a slight elephant in the room. There was a Godzilla movie, technically speaking, before Legendary Godzilla was made by TriStar. And to understand these films, you do have to confront the things that came before it. You can't fully understand Legendary Godzilla until you understand the TriStar Godzilla to an extent. And it's important because both these films have a film that come before them. In the case of Shin Godzilla, it's Final Wars. In the case of Legendary, it's TriStar. And this is important because in both cases, there was a major event that occurred between the making of these two films. And I feel in an interesting way, these two events influenced the evolution of these films in very similar ways. In the case of Godzilla, Legendary, between TriStar and Legendary, a little thing called 9/11 happened. A relatively major, very, very influential event. And one of the major side effects of this event is reverence for our troops, for example. And you can see that in Legendary versus TriStar. TriStar, the military are a bunch of bumbling idiots. There's no way around that. They're idiots. This guy who studies worms can outsmart them all, and he's the guy with the cure. Now that's fine. That's a very traditional 1950s, 1960s type of science fiction trope when you start seeing a backlash against the 1950s tropes of the scientists always being wrong and the military always being right. So if you go back to that, that type of style. But again, that was before 9/11. 9/11 changed a lot of things, particularly how the culture of the United States perceives its military and changed it how it perceives its government. The reason that's important is because Shin Godzilla happened after another major event of its own. The Fukuoka disaster in 2011 was a truly horrific disaster that led to major changes in Japanese society. One of the major ones is Japan became super anti-nuclear power. Japan used to get more than a majority of its power through nuclear power plants. It now no longer does. It just decided to shut down most, if not all of them. It didn't shut down all of them. The point is, it is very anti-nuclear power. And in addition to how horrifying this disaster was, it was generally seen, and I'll leave your own opinions on this, the government's handling of it was very bad. If you watch Shin Godzilla, there are scenes that are straight up, direct, one-to-one parodies of the government's response to Fukushima and the Fukushima disaster. A particular note is the press conference scene where they're dressed as power plant workers doing a press conference. It's a very famous moment in contemporary Japanese political history because of that. And so we have on one hand, we have 9/11, and on the other hand, we have Fukushima. And so these two events led to a culture where you have films that, again, compared to their previous incarnations, you have extreme reverence for the military, and you have extreme skepticism and general sense of incompetence from quote-unquote civilian authorities. I feel that is a very interesting element of these films. Again, something that both these films hold themselves. I also want to note this is not necessarily, things I'm observing are not necessarily exclusive to the Godzilla movie. These often are expressions of larger tropes, cultural trends, and attitudes of the time. But again, I think they're interesting observations. But we're going to... No, it's not. Okay. So with that, those are just observations on my part. I'll open up if the panelists want to add anything on to that, and then we'll just open up if anyone in the audience wants to contribute anything.
I have something short to say, but I'm a U.S. federal employee, so I took these two films. I noticed things that Ira brought them up, but one thing I was impressed by the Godzilla 2014 was that they did show FEMA, and they did show that, government does provide nice things. After you go, after you see two kaiju duke it out and they take down a lot of buildings, where do the people go? How do they find each other? And again, it's FEMA, so I was very touched that that was done. And as Shin Godzilla, I also teach leadership and management courses in my job. And that movie, just the first 30 minutes of it, is such a good illustration of a lot of problems that large organizations have to go through. And it's just such a wonderful illustration of how you have to, how people get locked into things and how they get totally vested in how things have been. And it just really, I enjoyed that part of it. But I'm going to let these two guys take over and enjoy the show.
I think it's very interesting that you brought up 9/11 and looking at it more from a sort of entertainment perspective. We were talking about trends in entertainment, in the arts. I've been recently working on something of a video essay on the recent trend of American kaiju. And it is true what he said. The American military force presented in TriStar's Godzilla from 1998, they are very bumbling, comedic. Most of the characters are played strictly for laughs. But at the end of the day, and this is a criticism many Godzilla fans have always had of that film, is they shoot him down. They killed Godzilla, quote unquote, with conventional weaponry. 3 missiles to his gut and he drops dead. Something that would ricochet off the quote unquote real Godzilla. And then we get a very dramatic example of in Shin Godzilla where we actually see close-ups of artillery shells failing to pierce his hide, bouncing off and then exploding in the air, surrounding his body. And this is very typical of American monster movies going all the way back to King Kong in 1933, where you could simply bring out the boys with their guns and they would bring down the threat. There is nothing that our mighty military, incompetent as they may be, there's nothing they can't stop. They will protect us, we are safe. 9/11 opens a very ugly can of worms where it's like, maybe we're not so safe. Maybe there are forces beyond our power that we can't conquer. Something the Japanese, going back to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and even just being a nation beset by natural disasters like tsunamis and earthquakes, they are very familiar with this. And so it's not too surprising that suddenly the concept of kaiju in American monster movies was an alien one. Usually monsters in American-made monster movies, they were just large animals. That's what Zilla, or the 1998 Godzilla is. He's a large animal, and he's killed as such. But suddenly you get movies like Cloverfield and then Pacific Rim. You get monsters that are no longer just animals, they are kaiju. They are bigger than life. They cannot be stopped by conventional methods. You need something bigger, something more, or they can't be defeated at all. They have to simply be driven off. And this is very much a result of 9/11. And you see, people criticized Cloverfield at the time for its 9/11 imagery, where you saw the streets just filling with dust and debris to the point that you couldn't see a thing. But now, I didn't interpret it that way at all. I don't think Cloverfield was ever meant to be anything more than a popcorn piece. I think they just said, well, this is what it actually looks like. Let's use that as a visual, signifier. But now you see these things starting to seep into the American culture, and when they finally get to do a Japanese-style Godzilla movie post TriStar, it's very much in that mold. Ken Watanabe as Dr. Serizawa, his line, "Let them fight," that we all love so much. That kind of encapsulates that, or I can't remember his name, but the general character who says, "You just expect me to stand here and watch, I can't do that." I always kind of chuckle to myself, it's like, haven't you seen one of these movies before? The humans just stand around and watch because there's nothing you can do but hope that when the dust settles, there's still something to go back to. And I think that that's what kind of created the new legendary Godzilla, or at least gave us the ability beyond just, reacting to the TriStar movie, wanting, okay, fans were pissed off, we gotta give them as much
mandate as we can, like reference 1954, reference the bomb, reference this, reference that, have them breathe this blue fire. I feel though that their ability to make that movie and to make it as grounded as it was is a direct reaction. I was talking again about the first responders. One of my favorite shots, and maybe it's because my dad is a firefighter, but one of the images I always remember from the end of Legendary Godzilla is seeing the first responders at the end, the firefighters, the people digging, civilians out of the rubble. And I don't think any of this exists in the world pre-9/11, and Godzilla 1998 seems to be proof of that. Similarly, Shin Godzilla doesn't exist pre-Fukushima. It's this, because a lot of people, they always ask my opinions on Godzilla movies, they know that I like them, and because Shin Godzilla's gotten so much praise, they say, well, what's this movie like? I hear it's really good. The scene I always reference is when he first stands up on his hind legs, and you see the chain of command going up and down through the government, to open fire on him, like, do we attack, do we not attack? And it goes all the way up and down, and then they see, is it one civilian in, like, what?
Yeah, it's a civilian, it's an old man carrying an old woman on his back.
Yeah, exactly. And because of this one person, or these two people, they don't open fire, and who knows, maybe they could have neutralized the threat, nipped it in the bud, as it were, but because of bureaucracy, because of this sort of, let's not use common sense, let's follow this weird infrastructure that we have in place despite these very unnatural circumstances. I don't think we would have seen this movie pre-Fukushima and without the example that the government set in the media.